The dust swirled across the horizon as Abigail Harper clutched the crumpled telegram in her trembling hands. Chicago had become unbearable since her parents' death, but she never imagined desperation would lead her to board a westbound train as a mail-order bride. The vast Kansas prairie stretched before her as the locomotive slowed, metal wheels screeching against the rails. Sweetwater Creek was nothing like the bustling city streets she had left behind, just a handful of weathered buildings baking under the relentless sun of 1876. Abigail descended the train steps, her modest trunk containing everything she owned. The station was nearly empty except for a tall figure leaning against a weathered post. He straightened as she approached, pushing back a worn leather hat to reveal striking blue eyes. "Miss Harper?" His voice was deep but gentle, like distant thunder without the threat of storm. "Yes, Mr. Callahan, I presume." Her voice remained steady despite her nerves. Samuel Callahan nodded, his tanned face creasing into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to Sweetwater Creek. Not much to look at, but it's home." He reached for her trunk. "The wagon's just over yonder. Town's a short ride away." Abigail studied him as they walked. His movements were fluid and confident, his shoulders broad beneath a faded blue shirt. He wasn't what she expected, younger than the letters had suggested, perhaps 30 at most. She had imagined someone older, more settled. "Your letters didn't mention you were a cowboy," she said, as he loaded her trunk into a weathered wagon. Samuel helped her onto the wooden seat. "Rancher. Got a small spread about 3 miles out of town." He climbed up beside her and took the reins. Figured that wouldn't matter much to a city girl looking for a fresh start. His directness caught her off guard. "I suppose it doesn't." The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking over the hard-packed dirt. Sweetwater Creek appeared gradually, a church steeple first, then the storefronts, saloon, and scattered houses. People moved about their business, some pausing to watch the wagon pass. "Not much compared to Chicago," Samuel remarked. "It's quaint." Abigail smoothed her travel-worn skirt, trying to absorb the reality of her new home. "Your letters mentioned a small house. Is it in town?" Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Outside town, on the ranch." He glanced at her. "Having second thoughts already?" "Miss Harper?" "No." The lie came easily. She had second, third, and fourth thoughts since stepping off the train. But Chicago held nothing but painful memories and mounting debts. "I made my decision before boarding that train, Mr. Callahan." Samuel nodded but remained silent as they passed through town. Abigail noted the curious glances from townspeople. A young woman carrying a basket offered a friendly wave, which Abigail returned hesitantly. "That's Mary Wilson," Samuel explained. "Runs the general store with her husband. Good folks." The wagon continued past the town's edge, following a winding dirt road that cut through golden grasslands. In the distance, Abigail could see a small house nestled against a backdrop of cottonwood trees, a barn and corral nearby. "That's it," Samuel said, nodding toward the ranch. "Not much, but it's paid for." "It looks lovely," Abigail replied, though anxiety knotted her stomach. The isolation was more complete than she had imagined. As they approached, Abigail noticed a man on horseback watching them from a distant ridge. She squinted against the sun. "Who's that?" she asked. Samuel followed her gaze, his entire demeanor changing in an instant. His shoulders tensed, and his hand moved subtly toward his waist, where Abigail noticed for the first time the holstered revolver. "No one you need to concern yourself with." His voice had hardened. The rider watched a moment longer before turning his horse and disappearing over the ridge. Abigail felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. "Mr. Callahan, if there's something I should know—" "Call me Samuel," he interrupted, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "If we're to be married, formalities seem a bit much, don't you think?" Abigail nodded slowly. Then you must call me Abigail. They reached the ranch, and Samuel helped her down from the wagon. Up close, the house was small but well-maintained, with a covered porch and curtained windows. A vegetable garden grew to one side, and chickens scratched in a fenced yard nearby. "It's not much," Samuel said again, almost apologetically. "It's more than I expected," Abigail replied honestly. After her parents' deaths, she'd been forced to sell their modest home to pay debts. The idea of owning land, any land, seemed like an impossible dream in Chicago. Samuel carried her trunk inside. The interior was simple but clean, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. A bookshelf held several well-worn volumes, and a handmade quilt brightened a rocking chair by the hearth. "The bedroom on the right will be yours," Samuel said, placing her trunk inside the smaller of the 2 rooms. "Until after the wedding, of course." Abigail felt her cheeks warm. "When will that be?" "Pastor comes through town every other Sunday. He'll be here in 4 days." Samuel stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Unless you need more time?" "No, that's fine." Abigail smoothed her skirt again. A nervous habit. "Your letters mentioned you've been in Sweetwater Creek for 5 years?" Samuel nodded. "Came west after the war. Worked cattle drives until I saved enough for this place." He hesitated. "Your letters didn't say much about why you answered my advertisement." Abigail turned to unpack her trunk, avoiding his gaze. "My parents died of influenza last winter. There was nothing left for me in Chicago." "I'm sorry to hear that." His voice was genuinely sympathetic. "I lost my parents young too. It's not easy." A moment of understanding passed between them, the first real connection since her arrival. "I'll let you settle in," Samuel said, breaking the silence. "Supper's in an hour." Left alone, Abigail sat on the narrow bed, reality crashing down around her. She was miles from civilization, about to marry a man she'd just met, a man who clearly had secrets. The rider on the ridge troubled her. Samuel's reaction had been unmistakable. Supper was a simple affair: beans, cornbread, and surprisingly tender beef. Samuel ate quietly, occasionally asking polite questions about her journey. Abigail responded in kind, but tension lingered between them. Unspoken questions hanging in the air. As Samuel cleared their plates, Abigail gathered her courage. "Who was that man watching us today?" Samuel's movement stilled. He set the plates down carefully before answering. "His name is Victor Blackwell. He owns the big spread north of here, the Diamond B." Samuel's voice was controlled, but Abigail could hear the underlying tension. "We've had our differences." "What kind of differences?" Samuel turned to face her, his expression guarded. "The kind that don't concern a lady from Chicago." Abigail straightened her spine. "I believe they do concern me if I'm to be your wife." Something like respect flickered in Samuel's eyes. "Fair enough." He sat back down, his forearms resting on the table. "Blackwell wants this land, has since I purchased it. This valley has the best water access for miles, and he believes it should be his." "Couldn't you sell it to him and buy elsewhere?" Samuel's laugh was bitter. "That was my first thought too. Made the mistake of refusing his initial offer. Since then, he's made it clear he doesn't intend to pay for what he can take." "Take? You mean steal? Can't the law help?" "Sheriff Davis tries, but Blackwell has money and connections. And patience." Samuel rubbed his jaw, where Abigail noticed a faint scar for the first time. "He's content to wear me down slowly." "Is that why you advertised for a bride?" The question slipped out before Abigail could reconsider it. Samuel's eyes met hers directly. "I advertised for a bride because running this ranch alone is damn near impossible, and because I'm tired of coming home to an empty house every night." His honesty was disarming. "But I won't lie to you, having a wife might convince Blackwell I'm here to stay, make him think twice. Or make me a target," Abigail said quietly. Samuel leaned forward. I would never let harm come to you, Abigail. You have my word on that. She wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. Thank you for your honesty, Samuel. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Abigail stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie, the distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind through grass, the occasional lowing of cattle. She had traded one precarious situation for another, but at least here, she had land beneath her feet and open sky above. For now, that would have to be enough. The next morning, Abigail woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Samuel was already up, tending to morning chores. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses and joined him in the main room. Hope I didn't wake you, he said, pouring her a cup of coffee. Got used to moving around early? Not at all. I should be up helping. Abigail accepted the coffee gratefully. What needs doing today? Samuel seemed surprised by her question. You don't need to worry about ranch work just yet. I didn't come all this way to sit idle, Samuel. Abigail sipped the strong coffee. I may be from the city, but I'm not afraid of work. A genuine smile crossed his face. Fair enough. Eggs need collecting, and the garden could use tending. I'll be mending fences on the north pasture most of the day. After a simple breakfast, Samuel showed her around the property more thoroughly, the chicken coop, garden, root cellar, and small spring house where milk and butter were kept cool. He introduced her to his horses, a sturdy brown gelding named Buck and a gentle mare named Penny. You ride? He asked. Abigail shook her head. Never had the opportunity in Chicago. I'll teach you sometime. Can't get far in these parts without a horse. As Samuel prepared to leave, saddling Buck and packing tools, Abigail noticed him checking his revolver before holstering it. Is that necessary for mending fences? She asked. Samuel's expression grew serious. Out here, it's necessary for breathing. He mounted Buck. Stay close to the house today. I should be back by sundown. Alone at the ranch, Abigail threw herself into her tasks with determination. The physical work was a welcome distraction from her thoughts. She collected eggs, weeded the garden, and even attempted to bake bread using the small wood stove. The results were less than perfect, the bottom slightly burnt, but the activity gave her purpose. In the afternoon, she explored the house more thoroughly, finding small insights into Samuel's character. A Bible with a faded inscription, a small wooden carving of a horse, surprisingly delicate. A tin-type photograph of a young man in a Union uniform, Samuel, years younger, his face unlined by the sun and whatever troubles had followed him west. She was hanging freshly washed sheets on a line behind the house when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her pause. Expecting Samuel, she was startled to see 3 riders approaching, none of them her intended husband. The lead rider was older, perhaps 50, with silver threading his dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes were of finer quality than Samuel's, and the horse beneath him was a magnificent black stallion. The men flanking him were clearly hired hands, their expressions impassive but watchful. Abigail smoothed her apron, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and her isolation. "Good afternoon, madam," the older man called, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. "You must be Callahan's mail-order bride. Word travels fast in these parts." She lifted her chin. "I'm Abigail Harper, yes. And you would be?" "Victor Blackwell, at your service." He dismounted with the ease of a man who had spent his life on horseback. "Owner of the Diamond B Ranch, your nearest neighbor, as it happens." So this was the man Samuel had warned her about. Up close, she could see the coldness in his eyes despite his cordial manner. "Mr. Callahan mentioned you," she said cautiously. "He's not here at present." "I'm aware." Blackwell smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Saw him heading north this morning. That's why I thought it a perfect opportunity to welcome you properly to Sweetwater Creek." He gestured to one of his men, who produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. A small wedding gift, locally made preserves, Mrs. Wilson's specialty. Abigail hesitated before accepting the package. "That's very kind, Mr. Blackwell." "Not at all." He looked around the modest property with barely concealed disdain. "I must say, Miss Harper, you don't strike me as the type to bury yourself in this rustic setting. Chicago, wasn't it?" "Yes." She stepped back slightly. "If you'll excuse me, I have chores to attend to." Blackwell didn't move. "Callahan's a stubborn man, admirable in some ways, foolish in others." His tone hardened. "This land would be better served as part of a proper operation. The Diamond B could offer fair compensation." Abigail understood now. "I believe that's a matter for Mr. Callahan to decide." "Of course." Blackwell smiled again, cold and calculating. "But perhaps a woman of your background might have some influence. Help him see reason." "I don't believe I will," Abigail replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Now, if you'll excuse me." Blackwell's expression darkened momentarily before he recovered his composure. "As you wish. But do think on it, Miss Harper. Sweetwater Creek can be dangerous for those who don't fit in." The threat was thinly veiled. Blackwell mounted his horse and tipped his hat once more. "Give Callahan my regards. Tell him I look forward to continuing our conversation." Abigail watched them ride away, her heart pounding. Only when they disappeared from view did she realize she was still clutching the package of preserves. She set it aside, unwilling to accept anything from such a man. Samuel returned at dusk, his expression grim when she told him of Blackwell's visit. "Damn his hide," Samuel muttered, pacing the small kitchen. "Coming onto my land while I'm gone." "He wanted me to convince you to sell," Abigail said, setting a plate of stew before him. "He seemed to think I might have some influence." Samuel sat heavily. "And what did you tell him?" "That it wasn't my place to influence your decisions." She paused. "Though now that I'm here, perhaps it should be." Samuel looked up sharply. "Meaning?" "Meaning that I didn't agree to marry you only to be widowed shortly thereafter." Abigail sat across from him. "This man is dangerous, isn't he?" Samuel was silent for a long moment. "Yes," he finally admitted. "He's had 2 of my neighbors run off their land in the past year. Another had an unfortunate accident during a cattle drive." "Then why stay and fight? Is this land worth your life?" "It's not about the land anymore." Samuel's voice was low, intense. "It's about not letting men like Blackwell decide who can live and who can't, who deserves a chance and who doesn't." He pushed his plate away. "But I won't lie to you, Abigail. Marrying me comes with risks I didn't fully explain in my letters." Abigail considered his words. "Then perhaps we should postpone the wedding. Give me time to decide if I'm willing to accept those risks." Samuel nodded slowly. "That's fair." He reached across the table, hesitantly touching her hand. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Whatever you decide." The touch of his calloused fingers against hers sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Thank you for understanding." The following days fell into a rhythm. Samuel taught Abigail the basics of ranch life, how to milk the cow, tend the animals, and even some rudimentary skills with horses. Penny proved a patient mount as Abigail learned to ride, though she clung desperately to the saddle at first. "You're a natural," Samuel encouraged, as she finally managed to guide the mare around the corral independently. "I think natural is overstating things considerably," Abigail laughed, flushed with exertion and pride. These moments working side by side, sharing meals, and gradually learning each other's habits and histories created a tentative bond between them. Samuel spoke of his family in Virginia, lost to the war, and his years driving cattle north from Texas. Abigail shared stories of Chicago, her father's watchmaking shop, and her mother's garden. "She would have loved this place," Abigail said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. All this open space and sky. And what about you? Samuel asked quietly. Could you love it here? Abigail met his gaze. I'm beginning to think I could. The pastor was due to arrive the following day. Though they hadn't spoken of it, the question of whether to proceed with the wedding hung between them. That night, Abigail was awakened by the smell of smoke. She sat up in bed, disoriented, before realizing the danger. Smoke was seeping under her door. Samuel! She cried, rushing into the main room. The front wall of the cabin was ablaze, flames licking up the wooden boards and spreading rapidly. Samuel emerged from his bedroom, pulling on his pants. Out the back! He shouted, grabbing her arm. Now! They fled through the rear door as the fire consumed the front of the house. Outside, the night was illuminated by the blaze. Samuel rushed to the well, but it was clear the fire had too much of a head start. The animals, Abigail gasped, already running toward the barn. Together they freed the horses and cow, driving them away from the burning structure. The chickens squawked in panic as Abigail threw open their coop. From the darkness came the sound of galloping hooves. 3 riders appeared at the edge of the property, silhouetted against the night sky. Even at a distance, Abigail recognized Victor Blackwell's imposing figure. Callahan! Blackwell's voice carried across the yard. Consider this your final warning. Next time, we won't be so considerate as to let you escape. Samuel reached for his gun, only to realize he'd left it in the burning house. He pushed Abigail behind him protectively. You're a dead man, Blackwell, he shouted back. Abigail clutched Samuel's arm. He'll kill you, she whispered frantically. Samuel turned to her, his face illuminated by the flames. A smile reckless and defiant crossed his features. Then he'll have to catch me first. Blackwell and his men wheeled their horses around and disappeared into the darkness, their laughter hanging in the air. By morning, the house was a smoldering ruin. The barn had been spared, as had the spring house and chicken coop, but their home and most of their possessions were gone. Abigail stood amid the ashes, clutching the few items they'd managed to salvage: Samuel's Bible, her mother's locket, a cast-iron skillet that had somehow survived. What now? She asked, her voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. Samuel surveyed the destruction, his expression grim but determined. We rebuild. He turned to her. But first, I take you to town. You'll be safer there while I deal with Blackwell. And how exactly do you plan to deal with him? Abigail demanded. By getting yourself killed? By going to the territorial marshal. The sheriff might be in Blackwell's pocket, but the federal marshal isn't. Samuel's jaw was set. Burning a man out of his home is a serious offense, even out here. And if the marshal doesn't help? Samuel didn't answer immediately. Then I'll have to handle it myself. No. Abigail's voice was firm. I didn't come all this way to watch you throw your life away. What would you have me do, Abigail? Run? Let Blackwell win? I would have you live, she said quietly. We can start over somewhere else. Samuel shook his head. If I run from this fight, I'll be running forever. Abigail knew in that moment that she had a choice to make: leave this stubborn cowboy to his fate, or stand beside him. The practical thing would be to take the next train east, back to the familiar streets of Chicago. But something had changed in her over these past days. This land, harsh and beautiful, had begun to feel like home. And Samuel, with his quiet strength and unwavering principles, had become someone she couldn't imagine leaving behind. Then we stand together, she said finally. But we do this smart, not reckless. Samuel stared at her, surprise and something deeper in his gaze. You don't have to stay. This isn't your fight. I believe it became my fight when someone burned down my future home. Abigail straightened her shoulders. Besides, 2 heads are better than 1, and I suspect Mr. Blackwell isn't expecting resistance from a city girl. A slow smile spread across Samuel's face. No, I don't believe he is. They salvaged what they could and moved temporarily into the barn, creating a makeshift living space in the hayloft. Samuel rode into town to speak with the pastor, who agreed to postpone their wedding until they could rebuild. He also sent a telegram to the territorial marshal, though it would be days before they could expect a response. Life continued, more difficult but not defeated. They cleared the burned timber and began planning a new house. Samuel taught Abigail to shoot his spare revolver, a skill she never imagined needing but took to with surprising aptitude. "You're a better shot than half the cowboys I know," he remarked as she hit 3 bottles in succession. "My father believed in self-reliance," Abigail replied, reloading the way he had shown her. "Though I don't think this is what he had in mind." Samuel grew more protective, rarely leaving her alone at the ranch. When he needed to check the herd or mend distant fences, Abigail accompanied him, gradually improving her riding skills out of necessity. A week after the fire, they rode into town for supplies. Sweetwater Creek's main street was busy with Saturday traffic ranchers and farmers coming in for provisions, cowboys from nearby spreads seeking entertainment at the saloon. Mary Wilson greeted them warmly at the general store. "Heard about your trouble," she said sympathetically. "Disgraceful business. The whole town's talking about it." "What exactly are they saying?" Samuel asked as he selected nails and tools for rebuilding. Mary lowered her voice. "That Blackwell's gone too far this time. Even his friends at the saloon are uncomfortable with burning out a family home." "We're hardly a family yet," Abigail said, feeling her cheeks warm. Mary smiled knowingly. "Yet." She patted Abigail's hand. "Don't you worry, dear. Samuel's a good man. Best in the county, if you ask me." As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Abigail noticed a group of men watching from the saloon porch. Among them was Victor Blackwell, his silver-streaked hair unmistakable even at a distance. "Don't look now, but we have an audience," she murmured to Samuel. Samuel nodded without turning. "I know. Keep loading. Act natural." The hair on the back of her neck prickled as they finished their task. Just as Samuel was helping her onto the wagon seat, Blackwell and 2 companions approached. "Callahan." Blackwell's voice was casual, as if they were old friends meeting by chance. "Terrible about your place. Heard some drifters might have camped too close and let their fire get away from them." Samuel's hand moved to his gun belt, but Abigail touched his arm, a gentle restraint. "How fortunate you happened to be riding by at just that moment, Mr. Blackwell," she said sweetly. "Almost as if you knew exactly when to expect the fire." Blackwell's smile faltered slightly. "Careful, Miss Harper. A lady's reputation is a fragile thing." "So is a man's neck when it's in a hangman's noose," she replied, maintaining her pleasant tone. "Arson carries serious penalties, even in the territories." A crowd was gathering, townspeople pausing to watch the confrontation. Blackwell glanced around, aware of the public nature of their exchange. "You should teach your woman to mind her tongue, Callahan," he said, his voice hardening. "I find I prefer her just as she is," Samuel replied, his hand still resting on his pistol. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a home to rebuild." Blackwell stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This isn't over. That land will be mine, one way or another." "We've sent for the territorial marshal," Abigail said quietly. "He should arrive within the week. I wonder what he'll make of recent events." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwell's face. The territorial marshals answered to federal authorities, beyond the reach of his local influence. "You're bluffing," he said, but without conviction. Samuel climbed onto the wagon seat beside Abigail. "Guess you'll find out soon enough." He took the reins. "Good day, Blackwell." They drove away, feeling the ranchers' glare burning into their backs. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Samuel said when they were out of earshot. "Possibly both." "He didn't expect resistance from me," Abigail replied. Men like that never do. Samuel's expression was a mixture of concern and admiration. You realize you've made yourself a target now. I already was. She met his gaze steadily. But now he knows I'm not just hiding behind you. That evening, as they sat by a small fire outside the barn, Samuel suddenly asked, "Why did you stay? After the fire, I mean. You could have gone back east." Abigail considered the question carefully. At first, I think it was stubbornness. I didn't want to be chased away. She paused, watching the flames dance. But it's more than that now. This place, it gets under your skin. And you, she hesitated. I've come to care what happens to you, Samuel Callahan. In the firelight, his eyes were intensely blue. I care what happens to you too, Abigail Harper, more than I expected to. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle despite his calloused fingers. They sat in companionable silence, the unspoken growing between them not just partnership against Blackwell, but something deeper, more personal. The next morning, they continued their work on the new house foundation. Samuel had selected a spot slightly farther from the road, with better visibility in all directions. As they worked side by side, the easy rhythm of their movements reflected a growing comfort with each other. You never said why you really stayed out west, Abigail remarked as they took a break, sharing water from a canteen. After the war, I mean. Most men went home. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Home was gone. Farm sold to pay debts while I was fighting. Parents dead. He squinted at the horizon. Out here, a man can build something that's truly his. No one looking down their nose because your boots aren't polished or your family name isn't old enough. I understand that better than you might think, Abigail said softly. After my parents died, the people I thought were friends, they changed. Suddenly, I was an object of pity or worse, an inconvenience. Samuel nodded slowly. Out here, you're judged by what you do, not where you come from. Most of the time, Abigail corrected. Men like Blackwell still think they're better because they have more. Men like Blackwell are the exception, not the rule. Samuel stood, offering her his hand. And they don't last forever. 3 days later, a dust cloud on the horizon announced riders approaching. Samuel grabbed his rifle, positioning Abigail behind him as they watched from the barn doorway. 4 riders, he said tensely. Could be Blackwell and his men. But as the group drew closer, Samuel relaxed slightly. That's Sheriff Davis in front, and... He squinted. I believe that's the territorial marshal with him. The 4 men rode into the yard, Sheriff Davis, a thin man with a perpetually worried expression, a broad-shouldered man with a badge pinned to his vest who could only be the marshal, and 2 deputies. Callahan, the sheriff called, dismounting stiffly. This here's Marshal Bennett from Fort Smith. Got your telegram. The marshal dismounted with more ease, his weathered face serious beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Mr. Callahan, Miss Harper. He nodded to them both. I understand you've had some trouble with Victor Blackwell. You might say that, Samuel replied dryly, gesturing to the charred remains of their house. For the next hour, they explained the situation, Blackwell's threats, the fire, the history of intimidation. Sheriff Davis shifted uncomfortably throughout, especially when Marshal Bennett asked pointed questions about why local law enforcement had failed to address the pattern of harassment. Blackwell has a lot of influence in the county, Davis said defensively. Hard to prove anything against him. Burning down a man's home is a bit more than influence, Bennett observed coldly. I'll be speaking with Judge Harmon about this. In the meantime, he turned to Samuel and Abigail. I can't leave men here permanently, but I can arrange for regular patrols, and I'll be paying Mr. Blackwell a visit this afternoon. He won't take kindly to federal interference, Sheriff Davis warned. I don't much care what he takes kindly to, Bennett replied. The law applies to everyone, regardless of the size of their spread. He fixed Davis with a hard stare. I suggest you remember that, Sheriff. After the lawmen departed, Abigail and Samuel shared a cautious optimism. It's a start, Samuel said, but Blackwell won't give up easily. No, Abigail agreed, but neither will we. That night, they heard horses approaching well after dark. Samuel grabbed his rifle, but the voice that called out was familiar. Callahan, it's Bennett. The marshal dismounted in their yard, his expression grim in the lantern light. Thought you should know Blackwell's gone. Cleared out of his ranch house with whatever he could pack. My men tracked him heading north toward Wyoming territory. Samuel frowned. That doesn't sound like Blackwell. He's not the type to run. He is when there's a federal warrant waiting for him in Texas. Bennett spat to one side. Seems your friend has quite a history. Operated under a different name down in the Panhandle. Wanted for murder, among other things. Abigail exchanged a startled glance with Samuel. He just left? After all this? Left his foreman in charge of the ranch, supposedly to handle his affairs while he's traveling. Bennett's tone made it clear he didn't expect Blackwell to return. I've posted men watching the property and the trails north, just in case. After Bennett departed, Samuel stood in the doorway of the barn for a long time, staring into the darkness. It doesn't feel right, he said finally. Blackwell running without a fight. Abigail touched his arm. Perhaps he recognized a battle he couldn't win. Samuel shook his head slowly. Maybe. But I won't rest easy until I know for sure he's gone for good. They continued rebuilding over the next week, the new house gradually taking shape. Word spread through Sweetwater Creek about Blackwell's departure and the warrant from Texas. Neighbors who had kept their distance, fearing Blackwell's retribution, now offered assistance. Men came to help raise the walls of the new house, and women brought food for the workers. Funny how people find their courage after the threat is gone, Samuel remarked as they watched a group of ranchers heading home after a day of building. They're making amends in their own way, Abigail said, and we need the help. Samuel looked at her thoughtfully. We never did talk about the wedding. Pastor Miller asked when we wanted to reschedule. Abigail felt a flutter in her stomach. Are you still asking me to marry you, Samuel Callahan? I believe I am. He took her hand, his expression serious. Though I understand if you need more time, or if you've changed your mind entirely. Abigail considered his words. She had come west as a practical solution to her problems, a business arrangement more than a romance. But something had changed in these weeks of struggle and resilience. She had seen Samuel at his most vulnerable and his most determined. She had discovered her own strength alongside his. I haven't changed my mind, she said softly. If anything, I'm more certain now than when I arrived. The relief and joy that crossed his face made her heart skip. Sunday, then? If the house isn't finished, we can use the church in town. Abigail nodded, smiling. Sunday it is. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and crisp, autumn beginning to paint the prairie grasses gold. The new house wasn't complete, but it had a roof and walls enough to call it home. Abigail dressed in her best gown, a simple blue affair that brought out the color of her eyes. Mary Wilson had insisted on adding a few touches fresh wildflowers for her hair and a borrowed lace shawl. Every bride deserves something special, Mary declared as she helped Abigail prepare in the back room of the general store. Samuel waited at the small church, unusually formal in a clean shirt and string tie. The building was filled with townspeople and neighboring ranchers, more than Abigail had expected. It seemed their stand against Blackwell had earned them respect in the community. Pastor Miller conducted a simple ceremony. When Abigail spoke her vows, looking into Samuel's steady blue eyes, she felt a certainty she hadn't expected. This man, this life. It wasn't what she had imagined for herself, but it felt right in a way nothing in Chicago ever had. The celebration afterward was lively, with food and music spilling out of the church and into the town square. As twilight fell, Samuel and Abigail prepared to return to their new home. "Mrs. Callahan," Samuel said, helping her into the wagon. "Has a nice ring to it." Abigail smiled, the name still new, but welcome. "Indeed it does, Mr. Callahan." They were halfway home when Samuel suddenly reined in the horses, his posture alert. "Something's wrong." Abigail followed his gaze. In the distance, an orange glow illuminated the darkening sky. "Fire," she whispered, heart sinking. "Not again." Samuel snapped the reins, urging the horses to a gallop. As they crested the hill overlooking their property, they could see flames engulfing their new barn. The house, thankfully, appeared untouched. "Stay here," Samuel ordered, jumping down from the wagon and drawing his revolver. "Samuel." "Please, Abigail, just this once, stay back." She nodded reluctantly, taking the reins. Samuel approached cautiously, scanning the surroundings. The barn was fully engulfed, beyond saving. As he neared the house, a shadow detached itself from the darkness beside the porch. "Hello, Callahan." Victor Blackwell's voice carried in the still night air. "Quite the celebration in town, I hear. Shame to miss it." Samuel raised his gun. "You're supposed to be halfway to Wyoming by now, Blackwell." "A necessary deception." Blackwell emerged into the firelight, his own pistol aimed at Samuel. "Marshal Bennett is disappointingly thorough. Had to let him think I'd run. He'll be back when he realizes you haven't. By then, it won't matter." Blackwell's smile was cold. "You'll be dead. Your pretty bride will be a grieving widow, and this land will be up for sale again." From the wagon, Abigail could see the confrontation unfolding but couldn't hear the words. She reached beneath the seat for the rifle Samuel kept there, her heart pounding. "You won't get away with this," Samuel was saying. "Too many people know what you've done." Blackwell laughed. "I've gotten away with worse, boy. One more dead rancher won't change anything." He raised his gun, but before he could fire, another shot rang out. Blackwell staggered, dropping his pistol as blood blossomed on his shoulder. Behind him stood Abigail, Samuel's spare revolver still smoking in her hands. "That's for our home," she said steadily. "Both times." Samuel moved quickly, kicking Blackwell's gun away and keeping his own leveled at the wounded man. "Are you all right?" he asked Abigail without taking his eyes off Blackwell. "Better than him," she replied, her voice remarkably calm despite her shaking hands. Blackwell clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face contorted with pain and rage. "You'll hang for this," he snarled at Abigail. "I think not," came another voice from the darkness. Marshal Bennett emerged, followed by two deputies. "Self-defense is justifiable, especially when the alternative was witnessing her husband's murder." Bennett nodded to Abigail with something like respect, before turning his attention to Blackwell. "Victor Blackwell, or should I say James Sutton, you're under arrest for attempted murder, arson, and outstanding warrants from the state of Texas." As the deputies took Blackwell away, Bennett explained that he had been suspicious of the rancher's too convenient disappearance. "Kept men watching the Diamond Bee. When my deputy saw Blackwell return, I figured he might make one last attempt against you. Followed him here." "Good timing," Samuel said, putting an arm around Abigail's shoulders. Bennett tipped his hat to Abigail. "Impressive shooting, madam. Most men I know wouldn't have made that shot under pressure." After the marshal departed with his prisoner, Samuel and Abigail stood watching the barn burn, unable to save it, but ensuring the fire didn't spread to their new home. "Some wedding night," Samuel said ruefully. Abigail leaned against him, the revolver still clutched in her hand. "I don't know. It seems fitting somehow. We met in fire. Why not begin our marriage the same way?" Samuel looked down at her with a mixture of amazement and tenderness. "You are the most remarkable woman I've ever known, Abigail Callahan." "And you," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, are worth fighting for, Samuel Callahan. The weeks that followed brought significant changes to Sweetwater Creek. Victor Blackwell, revealed to be a wanted man named James Sutton, was transported to Texas to stand trial for his crimes there. The Diamond B Ranch was sold at auction, purchased by a consortium of smaller ranchers who divided the land more equitably. Samuel and Abigail rebuilt their barn and completed their house, creating a home that reflected both their needs and aspirations. The small parlor housed Abigail's rescued books and Samuel's mother's rocking chair. They added a second bedroom, planning optimistically for the future. As winter settled over the prairie, transforming the landscape with snow and ice, they established routines that blended their different backgrounds. Samuel taught Abigail more about ranching and horsemanship, while she introduced new meals and comforts to their home. In the evenings, they often read together by the fire, Samuel's voice growing more confident as Abigail helped him with the more difficult words. Spring brought new calves to their growing herd and the discovery that their family would expand as well. Abigail's announcement that she was expecting a child filled Samuel with a joy he had never imagined possible. "A son," he said confidently, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Or a daughter," Abigail corrected with a smile. "Either way, this child will have something we both lacked: a stable home, filled with love." As her pregnancy progressed, their circle of friends in Sweetwater Creek widened. Mary Wilson organized a quilting bee to prepare for the baby, and neighboring ranchers offered assistance with the heavier work around the property. "Did you ever imagine this life when you placed that advertisement?" Abigail asked one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Samuel considered the question. "No," he admitted. "I hoped for a partner, someone practical enough to help run a ranch. I never expected." He gestured to the home they had built, to her rounded figure, to the peaceful prosperity around them. "All of this. Nor did I when I answered your advertisement." Abigail took his hand. "I was looking for security, not happiness. It seems we both got more than we bargained for." In the late summer, their daughter arrived, Sarah Elizabeth Callahan, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Samuel held her with reverent hands, marveling at how someone so small could so completely transform his world. "She's perfect," he whispered, watching as the infant clutched his finger with surprising strength. "She'll be as stubborn as her father," Abigail predicted with a tired smile. "And as brave as her mother," Samuel replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. 2 years later, they added to their family with a son, James Thomas Callahan. Their ranch prospered, allowing them to add more land and cattle. Samuel's innovative approaches to water conservation earned respect from other ranchers, while Abigail's organizational skills transformed their operation into one of the most efficient in the county. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they hosted a celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from miles around. As twilight fell and lanterns illuminated their expanded home and barn, Samuel found Abigail standing alone, watching their children play with the other youngsters. "Happy?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Exceedingly so." She leaned into his embrace, "Though I still can't believe how it all began: a desperate advertisement and a leap of faith." Samuel chuckled. "And a very persistent land grabber." "In a strange way, we should thank him," Abigail mused. "Without Blackwell's threats, we might never have discovered what we could accomplish together." "I prefer to thank your remarkable aim," Samuel replied with a grin, "and your stubbornness." Says the man who, when warned he might be killed, simply smiled and said, "Then he'll have to catch me first." Abigail shook her head. "I knew then that you were either the bravest or the most foolish man I'd ever met." "And which did I turn out to be?" Samuel asked, his blue eyes twinkling in the lantern light. Abigail reached up to touch his cheek, her expression softening. The best man I could have hoped for. Brave and foolish in exactly the right proportions. Around them, their home stood solid and welcoming against the vast prairie sky. Their children's laughter mingled with the music and conversation of their friends. In the corral, horses dozed peacefully, and cattle grazed on the hillside beyond. This was not the life Abigail Harper had imagined when she boarded a train in Chicago 5 years earlier. It was something altogether different, harder in some ways, richer in others, but undeniably her own. A life built with courage and determination, alongside a man who had proven to be everything his letters had promised and more. As Samuel drew her closer for a kiss, Abigail reflected that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the simplest of decisions: to board a train, to answer an advertisement, to stand and fight rather than flee. And sometimes those journeys lead to places more wonderful than anything we could have imagined for ourselves.